Hello, I'm mischievous Mark Giannacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, but I still don't think the last of those three things count.
And I'm Dapper Dan Gvozden, and again, quite sick. People who listen to the show long enough know I have a pattern of getting quite sick when the winter settles in. But I also own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say definitely count. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy. Welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk. Mark, right now I feel like I have thousands of pounds of lead on top of me, and right out of reach is an antidote to all of my sicknesses.
My goodness, Dan, and between that and me running a marathon last weekend, this review is a tad late. So I tip my hat to you for powering through. So I could go selfishly run 26.2 miles in another state last week. Anyway, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. Of course, also you can subscribe to the Amazing Spider Talk Substack for some B-book reviews, comic book nostalgia, and just plain old fun in written form. Remember writing and reading? You can do it there on the Substack.
It's as if it was new, and yet it's not. But the amazingspider.substack.com is where you can find it, or just look up Amazing Spider Talk on Substack, and you'll get our weekly, bi-weekly newsletter that we're sending out, which is probably more writing than anybody wants on Spider-Man. But you're listening to a Spider-Man show, so chances are you're going to enjoy it a lot. Speaking of which, this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you also want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep our podcast going, including our Substack, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 36. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover artwork is by Ed McGuinness and Marcio Menyz, and the interior artwork is by Ed McGuinness, inks by Mark Farmer, and colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramanga. This issue was first released on October 25th, 2023. Mark, it's time to bring it back. Our rek-rap recap. Tell us what happened in this issue.
Well, I got to give you like an opportunity to go in your hyperbaric chamber and restore your voice. So I will take my sweet time with this recap. Anyway. We open in Queens. A fist knocks on the door, and a meek gentleman answers. The knocker is conducting an investigation. He needs the person to look in the attic. And before he refuses, he wants the person to know that while he looks like a private investigator, he's actually wearing a disguise. Dear God, the man says, and that man speaks for all of us when we get the official return of rek-rap.
Woo!
Woo! Don't woo, Dan. You'll hurt yourself. The man accuses rek-rap of destroying property across the city. But before rek-rap can defend himself, the Grave Goblin shows up. Rek-rap never hides except when in disguise, so it's throwing hands time. That brings us over to the Limbo Embassy and Mayor Luke Cage. I mean, look, you can try and pretend this is an improvement over Mayor Eric Adams, and I would want to ask you, is Luke Cage a vegan? Anyway, Luke is meeting with Madeline Pryor and Spider-Man about the ghoul and demon problem in New York City. Madeline is unimpressed with Spider-Man's negotiation tactics, and I'm equally unimpressed by all the references this story is making to Dark Web. So color us both unimpressed. As it turns out, Madeline has hired an agent to hunt down these delinquent demons. Spidey and Cage debrief before Cage tells Spidey to hold back since Wilson Fisk laws from his reign of terror make Spider-Man an illegal superhero. Love the civics lesson here, Marvel. Anyway, Cage goes on about how hard it is for him to change the laws, but in that exact moment, he sends me 11 text messages asking me to donate to his re-election campaign and reminds me if I show up in off-year elections and vote for city council, maybe, just maybe, he can submit a bill that will change the law back before the Magia Party filibusters it. Anyway, this talk of politics is depressing me more than the earlier talk of dark web, so let's just get on with the recap. New scene, and we get some close-up visuals of some eyes, and speaking of wacky political references from Amazing Spider Talk, it's Silvermane! Love those polls for Silvermane lately, Dan. Anyway, Hammerhead! Ed McGuinness is having way too much fun drawing a disembodied geriatric head. And Silvermane also reminds us that the Magia will be reborn, and we're gonna make Magia great again? I don't know. Anyway, back to Limbo in the Garden of Jagged Souls, and Madeline is tending to the soil in high heels. She summons the Repossessor, and collectors everywhere are getting excited. New character, woo! Spider-Man is now in Queens, back at the house where we started. He's trying to get a rundown of what exactly happened there. Cut over to the East Village, and rek-rap is investigating and licking the side of the building, and really, who among us? Spidey is none too happy to see rek-rap around, but before they can more fully express their feelings, Dr. Octoball shows up, and we get another throwdown. That's when the Repossessor shows up, and very scarily absorbs Octoball and spits him out, causing him immense pain. Rek-rap is very afraid the same thing is going to happen to him, and despite Spidey's assurances to the contrary, the Repossessor assures rek-rap that, in fact, that same fate is waiting for him. So Spider-Man saves his good buddy, old rek-rap, but then the Repossessor says he knows Spidey, and the last panel is him uttering the words, Parker. So that is your rek-rap recap, with lots of political intrigue. Thanks to my scatological brain, Dan.
Way to be a New Yorker, Mark. Well, Mark, the last time we saw rek-rap, I suggested that as much as I loved rek-rap's appearance during Dark Web, and that I thought he had Razorback levels of appeal, that I didn't need to ever see him again. Now we have a story with rek-rap as the co-lead. Was I right in my initial reaction, or are you craving more rek-rap after this news story?
That's a great question, Dan, because like I do wonder how a character like Razorback would perform in like the era of social media and the internet. I have a feeling he would be around for more than just that one story.
Yes.
Yeah, so like that is worth noting from the get-go. With that said, I am a bit of an old school fan, as I'm sure many of you can understand from my opinions over the years. This has nothing, putting aside my thoughts on this individual story, which I thought was fun. I think we, like you said, when we saw rek-rap, we were like, rek-rap's great. I never need to see him again, and I still stand by that. Like, I think that this is a character that is gonna get old very quickly if they keep going to the well. I mean, so far so good, but like, I was not sitting there being like rek-rap, like if he showed up maybe 3 years from now, I'd be like, oh, I missed rek-rap, cool. But this is like, I can see myself wearing thin with this story very quickly, but through one issue we're fine. But anyway, were you longing for rek-rap? Were you reconsidering your initial opinion?
I mean, I do worry like you that the joke is going to outstay its welcome, and I know we're going to hear wildly different opinions on this issue, because if you don't find rek-rap funny, you're going to hate this. Like, there's really no way around it, rek-rap just so happens to be exactly the kind of thing I find funny in superhero comics, which is, like, I don't care where rek-rap came from. I don't care how he works. He's just big, dumb, confident, and very assured of himself. And normally I hate jokes that point out the joke, but since that's rek-rap's whole shtick, I kind of love it. Like, it's just so dumb and assured in its dumbness that I like it. And the more it leans to, like, Raphael's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in form, like, whether it be the trench coat and the top hat and the teeth and whatever, like, I am here for rek-rap. He is a sweet, innocent angel, and I'm going to protect him. He's like my new son in the pages of this book. So I thought it was really, really entertaining. I'm not sick of it yet. I could see myself turning, but this is exactly the kind of dumb confidence that I like. And frankly, I'm glad to have like an upbeat, kind of funny character in this book after the events of so many dark stories on this title. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I will say, you know, in concurrence with what you just said there, like, I mean, this is, despite the fact that I, you know, a few minutes ago was like, you know, maybe in a couple of years I would have more of a longing for him. I mean, in the cadence of these issues and storylines right now, like, this is a good switch up, you know, like it's, you know, regardless of whether it's rek-rap driving the humor or not, like, this is, I mean, I think even more so than the Doc Ock story that McGuinness did, this was like coming off of the Craven story, or Kraju story. This definitely felt like a good opportunity to like just be irreverent. You know, again, so I think we're talking about what this is going to be. This and 2 other issues after that, so a 3-issue arc, I think.
Yeah.
So like, you know, that seems fine, but you know, like, you know, not to do like fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, or whatever. But it's just like, okay, but really, for real, guys, like, don't push it. You know what I mean? Like come on. Like, but it's everything. I will say this too. I mean, Dark Web for me is still like the nadir of this entire volume of stories so far. You know, in terms of volume 6, but like this if Dark Web was more like this, and maybe it's just getting rid of Chasm right now. Maybe that's the difference. Like I think that I would have been more into Dark Web, because it's just like, okay, this is like really absurd. You know, we got the Grave Goblin and Dr. Octoball and the Repossessor and all that. But like it is, like you said, it's the kind of humor where it's very on the nose and very obvious and very leaning into it. But it's also not pretending to be different. I guess that was part of what annoyed me about Dark Web, was this was clearly what the book was, but like then there was this huge subplot where, like, you know, Chasm's like trying to take Peter's soul and cast him to purgatory or limbo, whatever you want to call it, and it just felt weirdly out of place, like we were trying to do too much. You know, I also feel like
I feel the same. I feel the same way, Mark. And I think the secret here is that the stakes are basically 0. You know,
yes.
like
yes,
and that's what matters. Is like we can have fun with it, because I'm not being asked to believe in anything except for the silly world of Limbo, and that Spider-Man has taken like a liking to rek-rap in some way, like enough that he doesn't want to see him devoured before his eyes.
Yeah, and you know, I think like the role that rek-rap is playing in this is very believable, if that makes sense. Like, you know,
yes.
Like it's still confined to this weird pocket of the Marvel universe. It's not like rek-rap the Avenger. I just gave them an idea, and I instantly regretted saying that out loud. So anyway, so when that happens, you can blame me. But yeah,
but like let's be clear about it. Rek-rap is like a vigilante from Limbo who has modeled himself after Spider-Man, and so is, you know, as a counterculture hero, like he is going out to peacefully round up these villains in the manner that Spider-Man would, and that's really fun. Like, it's silly and goofy and fun, and I'm here for it. Like, that's that's really funny to see him go about this. I mean, the scene where he shows up at this guy's house in full trench coat and announces that he's in disguise is really funny. Like, give me a lot more. I want to see his toes drawing sketches on notepads and various things. Like, this guy is funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, like, between the opening scene and then, in terms of non-rek-rap stuff, the scene between Spidey and Luke Cage and Madeline, I think were two of the funnier bits that we've gotten on this run so far. And we've talked a lot about this, like McGuinness, like this kind of writing, it just lends itself to it. He really does a great. I have really come to appreciate Ed McGuinness, the comic book artist, over the last two arcs. I mean, I thought he was great on the Doc Ock run. And I think he's great here because it's just so over the top, like even the Silvermane head with the and we're advancing gang war. I mean, like, that's still happening and pushing those pieces ever so slightly forward in the midst of this very absurd story. But like, everything is just so. It's I don't want to say Ryan Ottley-esque because Ottley still has a very different aesthetic, but it's just so over the top and so characterized that it just works, and I'm a big fan of it here.
Why are Dr. Octoball's tentacles so phallic? Like, I just have to ask. Like I can't escape from it. It's like, oh my goodness! Like, come on, McGuinness.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that maybe Dark Web was a realization that McGuinness is not a big event guy. Like, he is, do a small, funny story with him. He is a commuter cometh. He is a big, silly, goofy villains kind of guy. Have him in the Stegron, brings the dinosaurs to life and storms them out of the Natural History Museum arc. That's his kind of thing, and I think he kind of nails it here. I mean, that splash page, which could have been a double page spread of the Grave Goblin attacking rek-rap, is really amazing. I just thought there was a lot of nice stuff to look at here. I think the staging of the Luke Cage, Madeline Pryor Spider-Man scene is a little bit odd. With Luke Cage on that small chair, maybe it's meant to feel a little bit odd.
I think so. Yeah.
But yeah, I look. I would pick up, of all the miniseries we're getting in the world of Spider-Man, we're not getting a rek-rap miniseries. I would pick up an Ed McGuinness rek-rap miniseries. Like, I think that would be really fun.
We're just giving Marvel all the ideas tonight, Dan. So
Yeah, I mean, I would do it in lieu of another book. Like, I'm not disliking a lot of the books out of the Spider Office, but like, I think I would like a rek-rap more than a lot of what we are getting.
More than say Spider Boy, Dan. I know you're a fan.
Yeah, I do. Look, I'll just say it here. I don't get Spider Boy, and we'll definitely talk about this later, probably this episode. But that's a pitch for a character I don't get, and a style of humor that I don't think stands out all that much. Whereas rek-rap's humor is really unique. I don't know that I've seen characters do that kind of thing. And again, it's not to say I want a lot more. I was the guy that said if he never showed up again, he would be a sweet treat, But anyway, what do you think about like Zeb's writing for McGuinness? Do you think he's like, this is very different than that Dr. Octopus arc? Do you think it's just as strong, like, in how he's handling it?
Yeah, I do. I think that they've kind of developed a chemistry here. Like, I really. If memory serves, even in the Doc Ock arc, we came around on it, but the first installment was kind of like, and I think part of it was because it was coming off of Dead Language, and they were still trying to kind of address that while going into this more visually absurd storyline with Dr. Octopus, and again, like, this time, we really didn't, for better or for worse, and I happen to think for better. Just like, again, like, if you're gonna do a story like this, just do it. Stop like trying to. I don't know, but I just feel like they just went right into it. They hit the ground running, and I feel like they have a certain chemistry going now. And yeah, I mean, maybe you say it's, McGuinness maybe can't juggle a bigger event. I still think the 800-pound gorilla or elephant or whatever you want to say in the room is the fact that we don't have Ben Reilly to deal with here. I think that he really was kind of the anchor pulling that entire story down. Maybe we would have gotten something a little more coherent without having to resolve that storyline.
I do think it's weird here that we don't follow up on any of the events of the past arc, given how emotionally traumatizing that was. But I also don't mind it. I think about after the death of Gwen, the book kind of quickly moved on to other silly stuff. And I will give Zeb Wells credit for this. I think I've said this on episodes before. I think he's really excellent at the slow weave of setting up future storylines without making them feel like real interruptions to the book. I mean, yeah, the Hammerhead Silvermane thing comes out of nowhere, but this book itself, this story, is already fairly grounded. You have like an investigator character. You have like the mayor of New York discussing like politics and the rules around superheroes and supervillains in the city. There's even a nod to Randy Robertson getting back out and picketing again. Like, I think this is like fairly well integrated, and that's not an easy thing to do, to pivot across all these variety of tones and still feel like they are incorporating themselves into setting up stories down the line or, building up to a major event. I mean, I think we gave Nick Spencer a lot of crap about his introduction to the Kraven Hunted story, where it was like a page or two per issue for what felt like forever, or even just to the reveal of Kraven. And here it's like, let's just get it out of the way. Like, the gang boss who's instructing Hammerhead is Silvermane. Boom, done.
We know that this is pointing to gang war rather than trying to be a mystery box about it, which, again, I maybe it's a low bar, but I appreciate I appreciate that we're clearing the low bar of not having another mystery box about what's happening with the gang war. Like, what? Yeah. Wait, there are gangs? Who could be in the gangs? I mean, it's just like, look, it's the Magia, it's Hammerhead, it's Silvermane, whatever. Keep going.
I will address my eternal plea that the Shocker's place within the Magia from Superior Foes is acknowledged in this gang war, knowing that it won't be. But I did really enjoy this scene between Hammerhead and Silvermane. And I'm doubtful that Hammerhead, especially by the way he looks in these few pages, I think he's got something else up his sleeve. I think he still made a show of Madame Mask's death, and he's going to pull a coup on Silvermane. I think it's time for Hammerhead to like finally step up into not being a lackey. Like, I think there's something else going on here.
Well, Dan, if you like coups, I think I know a great place where you can talk about them or even stage them. You want me to talk a little bit about that?
I don't know what you're doing, Mark, but go.
Hundreds of listeners like you, Coup, hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. This is terrible. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what's been going on in the Slack this week? What kind of rebellion are you pushing down in the Slack?
Well, you joke, Mark, but we, the Spider Slack, have renamed ourselves the Oath Keepers, and we've got our sights very squarely set on the United States Capitol building.
Oh my!
And no, I don't want any calls from the FBI or anything like that. No, it's all good fun in the Slack. The week we were recording this, Mark, the Slack has been abuzz with the discussion of the launch of Spider-Boy, which I know you and I are going to be reviewing in our latest Substack. So if you're curious about what we thought about it, you can go there. But I think we can say we have pretty wildly different takes on Spider-Boy. And our enjoyment at levels of it. So maybe you'll come see one of the rare Dan-Mark disagreements on a title.
I mean, yes, for the sake of promoting our Substack, I'll say it's so wildly divergent. I think it's more just like where it's just like I'm okay with it, and you're like, this sucks. No, I don't know.
I don't even know that I think it sucks. I just still don't get the appeal of new characters. So,
there you go.
And I was hoping this first issue would really show me that or convince me of that. Like, yeah, and I'm not quite there yet. But anyway, come join in on the fun. Come join our amazing Slack. There's a link in the description to this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute. And the best part about it is the link is only available in the description of this episode. So it tends to keep out a lot of the riffraff who don't listen to the show. Like, you need to listen to the show to know it exists. And I think that's a really cool thing about it.
Love it.
So,
all right, let's keep going.
Moving away from taking down the government.
Yeah, let me lead us in, Dan, because I want to peel back the curtain, go into sausage making here. As we noted earlier in this episode, Dan is terribly sick, terribly ill. It's taking him all of his strength to muster something here, but I know why Dan is here tonight. And the reason why Dan is here tonight is because there is a mystery to unlock in this issue, and Dan wants to he was like, look, I can barely speak, but I can muster the energy for 30 minutes of speculation about who is the repossessor. He just said, like, let me go, let Dan cook. I don't want to get in the way of you cooking, Dan. So the big mystery, man, who is the repossessor? I already heard that apparently, like, collectors are big on this character. I don't know why.
Wait, is that true? Is that true?
I think I read that in the what do you call it? The comic list, like the CVR ranking or something like that. That this book is like picking up because people want to know who's the repossessor and why does he know Peter's identity? And it's like. And I was just kind of like, oh, yeah, that happened. Because that's how I look at these things.
I can answer half of that.
Okay.
Because I think the clues to solving who the repossessor are not particularly well disguised unless you're Mark Giannacchio and you speed read your comics. Or in one ear, out the other. Oh.
How would you get recaps as pointed as mine if I was speed reading, Dan? Come on.
Okay, that's fair. So basically what we find out in this issue is that the repossessor is basically an agent of Madeline Pryor's who is like summoned forth out of her garden or plucked from her garden in limbo to basically like go to Earth and get all of the whatever Sinister Six, whatever they call them, the Insidious Six, these limbo versions of Spider-Man's Rogues Galleries, which now form rek-rap's Rogue Gallery. But he's going to do it in like a painful way, as we saw with an Octoball here, and it's implied that he's already gotten, I think, the Grave Goblin as well. But my theory, and I don't think it's much of a theory because I think I can confirm it, is that it's Gus. And if you don't know who Gus is, Gus is from early in the Wells run. He's the insurance collection agent who was coming after Peter over like hospital bills and various things, and was ultimately beaten up by Ben Reilly for bugging Ben Reilly a few too many times and dragged to limbo, where Madeline Pryor in Amazing Spider-Man number 14 tried to use him to basically save Chasm. Like she plucked his soul out by offering him this like apple that he could bite into, and it allowed her to taste of his soul, where she proclaimed him a, quote, evil man, end quote. And at the time, I think you and I thought this was kind of weird to give this character such a like brutal
elaborate
death
story.
Yeah, and there's this interesting panel in page 14, which I sent to you. She basically says that he's well known in limbo, and that there's like something going on with his attic, like, and special tools that he has there. And at the time, I thought maybe this dude's like a serial killer. This seems like a really strange thing to slap onto this insurance agent.
Right.
I still think it's kind of strange, given that I think he had a decent role just being a normal guy coming after bills from Peter, which we've seen many times before. But let's see where this goes. I mean, obviously, there's some setup here because in this issue, the tenant who rek-rap is trying to shake down says his landlord issued him to not let anyone into the attic, which corresponds to what we found out in issue 14, that there's something in Gus's attic. And, here rek-rap and Grave Goblin burst through the attic, and apparently it's a mess, but rek-rap grabs some paperwork from the attic, which ultimately leads him to Peter's apartment. I'm guessing maybe it's the health insurance stuff, but maybe there's something else going on with that health insurance thing that we don't know about, because then when the book ends, like you said in your recap, we see the repossessor saying Parker. So he maybe has made a connection that Spider-Man and Peter Parker are the same person, or he made that connection before. There's definitely something else going on here. Gus was up to something in his attic that may or may not have had something to do with Peter Parker. And this is the real mystery that hard-boiled detective rek-rap is out to solve. And, like, if you don't believe me, just go look at images of Gus versus the image of the human form of the repossessor. They're basically the same. It's just one of them is very ghostly looking, and the other one is not. Mark, is this convincing to you?
Dan, all I want to say to you is, like, in my best, like, Thanos voice is, like, what did it cost you? Because, to give that recap with your condition, I just feel like it's, like, everything.
I appreciate it, yeah.
No, this all tracks, and yes, to nod to what you said before you started, I 100% missed all of this on my 2 reads of this comic before this review. It took a text from Dan to be like, because he was like, well, we all know who the repossessor is. I'm like, yeah, why don't you tell me, Dan, just in case, so I can make sure we're on the same page. And it's like, oh yeah, no, this all makes sense. With all that said, it's like, to your other point, like, I don't quite understand why we're spending such bandwidth on this, because I mean, like, Gus the character was introduced as part of the storyline where Peter was being a deadbeat about everything, and including paying his bills, and like it just seems like a very cut and dry situation to be in. Like, he was ignoring Aunt May. He was a bad roommate and friend to Randy. He's on the outs with MJ, and he owed some bills to this, and this guy wanted to collect. And all of a sudden, we like upped the ante on the story. And yes, I frankly had kind of forgotten my initial reaction in 14 to his situation, but you bringing it up this afternoon reminded me, and I was just like, yeah, what was that? Like that just seemed weird, and it's still weird. Yeah. I don't. That doesn't change. Like it's, I don't. And this is kind of goes part and parcel even with what we were saying at the beginning of the episode with rek-rap. It's like, if this is contorted into, if this subplot with Gus is contorted to something where suddenly there's like real stakes and drama behind it, like I'm frankly gonna think this is I'm gonna turn against this story, to be blunt. You know what I mean? It's like this is just we don't need this. You know what I mean? Like there's enough going on in Peter's life that actually matters for this thing that doesn't matter to be presented as it matters, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing that this character has on him that actually makes a difference, in my opinion. So, and there's nothing in his attic that I think would get me to care.
There would have to be a really, really like interesting retcon to make it make sense why to treat that character in such a fashion, if not to just create a new villain or close up a plot thread, or or for Zeb Wells to kind of like in his death punt what he wanted to do with the character down the line, or down the field rather. I still don't get it. Maybe whatever the secret of the attic is will be something interesting. Who knows? Maybe it's even the monster from the hospital that Mary Jane had to
I thought
fight.
about that as we were talking about like all the weird stuff going on. I'm like, oh, don't be the monster from the hospital in any of this. I don't need that. No, I mean, like, look, the only thing that could be in that attic that I think would actually have like real consequence would be like, the baby that Norman Osborn stole in Revelations or whatever storyline that was.
The one that you and I both want dead.
Yes, according to the internet. Anyway, I don't know what could possibly be the conclusion of this that would actually make me be like, oh wow, what a payoff. I mean, like, talk about a slow burn. It's not there.
Yeah, I'm of two minds. I want to commend it for not dropping the plot thread and like making this all weave together and feel like something like that's like tight and was like planned out over a year in advance. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't really care, make me care, but I doubt you're gonna get there, Yeah. So, Mark, what grade are you giving this book?
I mean, it's a kind of a hard comic to grade because I don't think it's particularly good, but it's good but it's funny enough to feel enjoyable. I'm B-. There you go. It's slightly better than average.
Yeah, I'll give it a B- as well. I enjoyed it, and it definitely picked me up on a really bad week of work that I won't get into. But
sure.
Coming and reading a delightful Spider-Man comic put a smile on my face, and way to go, book.
Way to go, book. Well, on that note, it is that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Heck, maybe you can buy me some chicken noodle soup to help me feel better. But a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do, and a special thanks to our newest contributor, Kirby. I don't think it's the round pink guy, but you never know.
I mean, it all ties together, Dan. Well, to download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like J.M. DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, Mark Bagley, David Michelini, and many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, until we change the name of our podcast to the Amazing Parker Pete Talk, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.